Hey everybody, so I am going to be doing a live reading for chapter 22. My eye on this side here it's a little tougher to tell than I thought it would be. Maybe I got the lighting right. You can see it there. It's pretty swollen. I've got some sort of minor infection or something there. It's fine. But it looked worse yesterday, so I was going to do an extra live stream yesterday, but I chose not to. So I'm gonna do this chapter, and then I'll try to do another one tomorrow. But tomorrow the schedule is chock full of appointments, so it may not be able to happen. But we'll get through 22 today, which takes place entirely in Agladeus, and then we will get back to what's been happening with Trem and company. In the last chapter that we read, it was Trem and Ghost returning surprisingly to Delmore just in time to save Jovaneleth and the others from death at the hands of the broken invaders. And this chapter, now that they are free of Delmore and on their way south, is jumping back to Angladeus, where Varasho, Lena, and Graham and Derek are trying to rescue Varasho's father, the deposed king of Angladeus. I also realized that I hadn't had my streaming activity alerts activated, so some people may have missed previous streams because I didn't have it turned on. So that's back on, and you can find all of the previous chapters if you've missed any in the VOD section. You can also get them on YouTube. If you go to YouTube, search for Vulture X21, same handle that I'm using here, and you can see those under a playlist that is the Legacy Chronicle of the Sword. As always, you can get the book right on Amazon if you search T.H. Paul and Legacy Chronicle. So, and the second book is also still available. The dungeons underneath the Angladaic Palace were rotten with disuse. Varasho was paying little attention to their decay as he raced to keep up with Lena. She held a torch aloft in one hand as she ran, her long cloak trailing it like a moving shadow behind her. Varasho tried to keep his eyes on her and her trailing black hair as it sailed out behind her, but he couldn't keep up while carrying his heavy steel staff. He could also hear Graham and Derek running behind him, the older man wheezing as he struggled to stay near them. Varasho ignored the guards and picked up his own pace as they had a torch and he didn't. For Varasho, Lena was the only guide. Varasho's hand brushed the remnants of cobwebs along the walls that Lena had broken. His father had left these boughs under the palace to be forgotten. It pained Varasho to think that Arvadas was now suffering in the very place he and his ancestors had tried to bury. Varasho watched Lena's light pause, then turn and disappear around a corner. In almost complete darkness, she hurried forward. Paladinus, take that woman if I get lost. She's not even supposed to be here. Varasho turned where he thought Lena had gone and stepped into a dark hole. He felt around and realized it was a steep spiral staircase. Taking the steps as rapidly as he dared, he reached the top. It was still completely black. Guessing, he turned left and started tentatively walking in the direction that he had come from on the floor below. The floor felt the same as it had level beneath him, and there was nothing to indicate what direction to move in. Still, he chose to push onward. He thought he could hear voices now coming from the direction he was traveling in. Varasho paused, trying to pierce the gloom with his eyes. Lena, he hissed. A hand closed over his mouth. Varasho instinctively reached back and grabbed the attacker's arm, ready to toss him to the floor when Lena whispered, "Stop, it's me." Varasho released her and she remained close to him, talking softly. "They're ahead of us, the guards. I heard one of them mention Renon's name. They must have reached their cells a moment ago. I can't hear their boots anymore." "We must not wait, Lena. We have to help Renon before he gets himself and my father killed." "There were 6 of them, Varasho. We need Graham and Derek." Varasho shoved her off of him. "There isn't time." Varasho moved swiftly but silently forward. He could hear voices down the hallway. He crept low and silent, trying to get as close as possible without giving himself away. Varasho could see torchlight now and hear voices clearly. There was a conversation going on, apparently between his father and Renon. He could hear the High Lord Erindian's voice as well, speaking calmly and rationally. Something brushed against his shoulder as he crouched at his cell entrance, watching the dim torchlight. Lena knelt beside him. "Go back," he whispered. Lena didn't move, so he huddled there, listening. He heard his father's voice. "Are you really so bent on completing a false king's foul deed, when he cannot do himself in his cowardice?" A voice Varasho did not know, presumably a guard, spoke. "We serve a king. What are you, old man? Nothing but a lowly prisoner, and it's time for your sentence. Sir Renon, I believe the honor is yours." Varasho looked back. He could see dim light. Graham and Derek were close. "Lena, go and bring them here quickly." Dark eyes regarded him coolly. "What will you do?" Varasho hefted his staff. "Renon needs my help." Lena was given no chance to argue. Varasho was already moving. He was quiet, keeping his staff high but angled to try and avoid the metal-causing glare from the torch. Varasho neared the cells holding the High Lords and knelt again, barely 20 feet away from his quarry. Rhiannon stood there, proud and stiff in his newly acquired purple cloak and shining armor. He wore Vendile's insignia, but even Varasho could read the disdain in his eyes. There were 6 guards with him, all Vendiles, and likely his best and most loyal men. Varasho watched and waited. Rhiannon opened the gate and stepped inside. He was certain of his fate now. He would die here with his king. He pulled forth the sword he had carried for Arvadas for so long, held it high, and saluted the bound monarch. Arvadas' gray eyes regarded him sadly. Death by an unknown hand, is it? Perhaps, said Rhiannon, but not my hand. The knight spun and struck. The first guard was not expecting treachery and took his blade full in the face, splitting it in twain. The others reacted swiftly, drawing their swords and rushing to meet the rebellious man. Rhiannon closed in the entrance quickly, parrying the first weapon, but taking a second off his armored chest, knocking him backward. He surged back towards the cell door, trying to block the entrance with his body. Varasho struck then. He materialized from the shadows with his staff in 2 hands. The first blow smashed a guard's skull, and the second buffeted another a short distance down the hall. The Vendile loyalists were now running, yelling, "Traitors, invaders in the palace," but there seemed to be no one to hear them. Varasho spun his staff swiftly in a circle about his body to keep the enemy at bay. His face was motionless as he whirled it, creating a wide radius around him. The still living guards split their force, 2 to battle each would-be rescuer as Varasho spun the weapon effortlessly in arcs, finally stopping with it across his hip and pointing it at his opponents. "If you recognize the true king of Angladeus, you'll leave now, and let us be on our way." The guards paused as though considering this, and Varasho heard shouting down the tunnel. Graham's voice came down the hall. "More coming! Hurry, my lord!" Varasho glanced at Rhiannon. "Well, I guess it's just us, then." The guards lunged at both their foes at once, trying to take the prince unaware. Rhiannon leaped between the 2 assailing him to protect Arvadas, and took a blade in his side that snuck in under the armor. He only grunted despite the pain and smashed his mailed fist into the man's face, crushing his nose. Varasho nimbly dodged a blow and swept his staff low, toppling one of his attackers. In the same motion, he brought the heavy iron weapon down on the man's head, killing him instantly. The second guard struck, but again Varasho was too quick, deflecting both wild blows and kicking him against the bars of his father's cell. The dazed guard swung blindly and missed as Varasho ducked, striking the wall instead. The prince finished him with an upward swing of the staff. Rhiannon had downed both of his remaining opponents as well, but was holding his blade barely above the stone as he struggled to stop the bleeding at his side. Varasho looked at his father, who nodded to the knight. Rhiannon glanced at the prince and motioned dismissively with his sword. "I'm fine, my lord. Attend to the king." Lane and the others came running down the tunnel. "At least a dozen guards are milling about the entrance to the dungeons, Varasho," she gasped, "and more are sure to be coming behind them." "My men will be attacking the hall above us now," said Rhiannon. "They were to buy you time to reach your father." Lena looked at the knight and then Varasho. The prince paused. Then Arindian spoke calmly and evenly. "Free us first, Varasho, and I will attend to Calavar. It does no good to formulate a plan while some of us are all in chains." Varasho grabbed the keys from the body of one of the guards and tossed them to Lena, who unlocked Arindian's cell in bonds. The High Lord thanked her and took the keys to Calavar's cell. Graham pulled some cloth from his belt pouch and tried to assist Rhiannon, with Derek looking on, wide-eyed. The king forced himself upright in his shackles and met Lena's eyes, which were watching him from a safe distance. The 2 stared at each other, barely noticing Arindian's return with the keys to free the king. Lena took them and silently slid near him, releasing the bonds. Arvadas kept his eyes on her. "Thank you, young lady." Lena cast him a look askance, answering, "Of course, my lord." "Have I seen you before?" asked Arvadas. "You seem familiar somehow." Lena smiled shyly. "My name's Lena Engrove, and I know you, my king, but I doubt you know me." As the manacles came loose, Arvadas said, "I know your name now, and I will not soon forget it." Arvadas rubbed his wrists and brushed his now filthy robes as well as he could before he moved stiffly to Calavar's cell. Graham, Rhiannon, and Derek stood blocking the hall, looking for trouble from back in the direction of the palace proper. They could no longer hear any footsteps approaching, and Varasho was urging them to be quiet in case those within had not been alerted to the prisoner's escape. Calavar was unconscious and badly beaten. Arindian glanced at the king and his son and then nodded solemnly, exiting the cell. Arvadas clasped hands with Varasho at last. "You should not have come, as I tried to warn you." Their eyes met. "But I thank you, and I love you, son." Varasho swallowed emotionally before uttering, "It's what Logan would have done. I would have left you here. It would have been the intelligent thing to do." Arvadas smiled. "I made an entire reign out of doing the unintelligent thing, you know." "I know." "I'm proud to have raised such a man, Varasho, as proud as I am your brother. I realize sitting here waiting to die, I never told you that." Varasho shrugged. "Your obligations." Arvadas seized him. "My obligations were to my family, and the people. I failed some of both." Varasho shook his head. "I never admired a man more than you. Admiration is not love, son. I've never wanted to be admired. I only wanted to be loved." Varasho met his eyes. "I do love you, father, but I'm a son not of yours, but of our teachings. I do what I do because I was trained to do it. This is the first time I've ever done anything remotely against my training." Arvadas chuckled softly. I must say, you picked a good time to start. Despite himself, Varasha smiled, though he tried to hide it. Then he grew serious. How are we going to get Runadin out of here? Can we even move him? Arvada sighed. Could we get him to wherever he is you came from? The tunnel collapsed behind us. We can't go that way. Arvadas considered this a moment. Then that would mean our only way out is down the hallway and through the palace itself, where many more guards await us. Arindian strode softly into the room. We have other problems, my king. It would appear your gallant servant Renan is badly hurt as well. How are we going to get both he and Calavar from here? I do not know. Renan said he has allies among the guards, Varasha said thoughtfully. If only we knew how to contact them. Arindian shrugged. We have not long. The other guards surely heard the commotion and are now concerned with the long silence. We must make a decision, and quickly. Arvadas put up his hand to quiet the others. There's a way out of here other than going up. We have to descend further. Arindian cocked his head to one side. What might that accomplish, my friend? We came from below, father. There can't be much beyond these depths. Arvadas grunted. I'm afraid there's a great deal beyond the lower levels, and the going will not be easy, but if we make it clear, we should be past the city walls. Lena came into the room then. There are lights starting to come down the hall, my lords. We must move quickly if we're to beat them to the stairwell. Arvadas shook his head. There's another way down at the end of this hall. It should buy us some time. Varasho, take Calavar and have Graham and Derek assist Renan. Lena and I will lead the way, and you, friend Arindian, can cover our rear. The solemn High Lord bent down and picked up a sword from one of the fallen guards. I'll do my best. Arvadas retrieved one as well, while Varasho hefted Calavar onto his back. The old High Lord groaned, but did not waken, and his girth was great, wearing down the young prince. Derek and Renan came shambling forward, the brave knight leaning on the younger guard. Graham and Arindian took up positions at the rear, and with Arvadas leading the way, they began moving deeper into the dark of the dungeons. Only Lena still held a torch, so the party had to stay packed in tightly to avoid losing sight of one another. They moved as fast as they could, and then faster still when they heard the shouts of the guards as they found their companions' bodies. Arvadas hurried forward and came to a great stone wall with a massive gargoyle protruding from it. The cells about them were pitch black, but Lena edged near the king, thinking she heard something moving in them. Arvadas patted her on the shoulder and whispered, Don't stray from the center of the hall. There are things down here far worse than the guards. Arindian said casually, to no one in particular, Always important when selecting an escape route. Arvadas reached up and thrust his hand into the mouth of the gargoyle. He pushed his arm upward until his elbow nearly disappeared, then tugged down hard and whipped his hand clear of the mouth. The statue groaned almost as though it were crying out, then fell forward slowly, resting on the protruding claws of the beast, and revealing a black portal beyond that seemed to open downward into the earth. Arvadas helped Varasho through first, then Renan and Derek. Arindian insisted on waiting until they were all inside, before he clambered in after them himself. Once beyond the hallway, Graham and Arvadas pulled the great iron handle on the back of the statue and it rose slowly to its former position. Having completed their escape for the moment, the party turned, and from Lena's torchlight observed their new surroundings. It was a great cavern they stood above, with a wide pool below and huge stalactites hanging almost to the floor. The place itself gave off an eerie glow, so much so that Lena's torch seemed unnecessary. Amid the rocks and moisture dripping from the ceiling sat great cairns and heavy stone coffins of incredibly ancient design. The party was positioned high above the pool of dark water and the tombs surrounding it, a long and winding staircase descending almost immediately from the secret door that they had just stepped through. Even from the great height, they could see another stair leading upward on the far side of the underground chamber, similar to the one just before them, one they would have to reach by passing through the still water that occupied the center of the huge cave. Arvadas walked forward to the edge of the steps and surveyed the scene before him quietly. Graham and Varasho exchanged uneasy glances before Renan spoke. What manner of place is this? It was Arindian who answered him in a voice that belied his nervousness, something rare for the even-tempered and well-read High Lord. It's the Cavern of Ancients, a tomb lost in memory, to all, well, apparently all but some. Varasho looked at his father, asking, How did you learn of this place? The king spoke calmly as he stared down the great yawning depths. There are some texts available only to the rulers of Angladeus, and one such book is the Tome of Serestus, the first king of our people. He chronicled all the ancient and dark secrets of the founding of our nation, before we became who we are now, and among them he included this place, the Cavern of Ancients. Arindian continued, In the lore of Angladeus, this cavern was thought to be no more than a myth. It said that the weapons these dead are buried with contain almost unlimited power, and treasures residing in their caskets would be enough to buy our kingdom 3 times over. Arvadas added, Serestus also said that this place is a source of unnaturally strong evil. The shuffling we heard in the cells above is but a taste of the darkness amid these tombs. Arindian cleared his throat. Then might I ask, old friend, why we are attempting this particular road? Indeed, said Graham hoarsely, I'd rather face an enemy I can understand than some dark magic I do not. Arvadas turned to them. We're here because Serestus noted that passing through the cavern would not be difficult if one came there out of need and touched nothing of the dead. They will not strike us as long as we leave them be. But be warned, my friends, The creatures may be bound by the laws of their imprisonment here, but it does not mean they will not try to entice us with their words and magic. Touch nothing. The exit is only just across that pool of water, and we shall take the shortest route straight through it and be on our way." The weary party glanced about at one another for a time, considering the king's words. Then Lena gathered herself and stepped down upon the high stair leading to the cavern floor. The others paused as if waiting to see what would happen, but as she continued to walk unhindered, they too found the courage and began the trek downward. Verasho followed her still carrying Rindian on his shoulders. He peered intently before him as though he might be able to spot the danger below before it revealed itself. Down they went, and the descent was farther than they anticipated. Soon they had traveled so deep, Rindian speculated they might be as much as a mile below the palace. It was an unnerving revelation and an uncomfortable experience, the silence of the cavern broken only by faint echoes of dripping water. Lena watched the dust flee from her soft boots as she came down the carved stone stairs. The air was alive around her, and she could hear it whispering to her. As she descended, it became louder and more insistent in her head, and the rate of her tread slowed. Arvadas caught her from behind with a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Do not heed the voices, child. Move swiftly and surely through the water. Go now, while we're still under our own power." Lena felt the reassurance in his grip and continued onward. The stairway curved, and she felt the living air cool drastically with each step. Suddenly, without realizing how, she was at the bottom of the stairs and only a few feet from the water's edge. She glanced at it, noting the dark, cold water seemed to house in its reflection, and then Arvadas was beside her again. "Hold my hand and we shall go together." To the others he called, "Lock hands. Do not break the clasp of your partner." The king took her hand gently and stepped into the water. It was completely silent entry by all. No splashing or even rippling disturbed the unnatural peace of the cave, as though the water was not even liquid at all, but something more sinister. It was cold, so cold it frosted the armor on Renan's hanging chestplate, and he paused to warn Derek and Graham of the phenomenon. The cold was clinging, and Graham muttered that it seemed to creep above the water and into his chest, but Rindian harshly silenced him from the rear. They were only a few feet away from the shore, with almost a quarter of a mile to cover across the strange pond, when the voices began to resonate clearly about them. They came out of the tombs on the tendrils of purpose, whispering of great deeds and greater treasure. At first, the very nature of their origin made ignoring them easy. Then the constant speech, icy as the water they were passing through, began to seep into the bones of the fugitives. Arvadas kept his path straight, loudly whispering words of encouragement. "Heed them not. Keep with me. We're almost to the middle of the pool. Do not listen to this false king. He knows not of us. He cannot even recall who we were in days gone by. Yes, do come take our gifts. Take them for a meager price. They are powerful. You and your bright armor could be greater than those you sacrificed to serve. You could be true heroes if you will but take our offer." The words were like webbing, and the weakened Renan could barely resist them, while the cold seemed to slow him even more. He shook his head to try and clear it, but it felt as though something stuck to his forehead, and he released the hand of Verasho before him, separating from the prince, who was holding on to Lena, and by extension Arvadas, from the rest of the line. As soon as Renan broke the chain, something interceded between them, and his hand froze in its raised position. "The loyal subject, does your wound trouble you? We could heal that in a moment, but a trifle of our power." The thing before him was mostly transparent, a strangely clothed figure, with an indistinguishable face and undulating body. Renan tried to see deeper into the visage and found his thoughts were turned inside out. He could not remember where he was, or even who he was. He began to panic, releasing the hand of Graham behind him, who was yelling, trying to get him to go around the apparition before them. Erindian reached swiftly and lunged forward, grabbing the bewitched man and hurling him through the figure towards Arvadas. "Time to be gone, my lord. Enough walking. Make haste." Arvadas turned briefly to see what had happened, but Lena and Verasho shoved him forcefully towards the far shore. Derek shouted a warning, and suddenly there were strange figures all about them, whispering in a maddening frenzy, and the party could do nothing more than forge ahead. Derek had his sword out and was backpedaling desperately, looking for a foe to strike at, but there was none. Verasho, who had braced Calavar across his shoulders well enough to free his hands to hold on to Renan and Lena, now let go of her hands so he could speed his motion forward without dropping the High Lord. This created another rift for the specters to divide them, and soon there were divisions throughout the party. However, each of them in their small pocket clung together and blindly moved forward, the strong voice of Arvadas pulling them towards the far shore. They pressed on. Derek swiped at a few figures, and it brought only maniacal laughter rebounding off the cavern walls. He turned and ran hard for the rest of the group, sheathing the obviously useless steel blade. Derek nearly knocked them all over when he reached them, Erindian having passed him when he began to flee in earnest. The High Lord stayed him, and they turned their eyes forward. The strange creatures surrounded them, and were indeed flitting among them, but the group had packed itself together tightly enough to be able to see one another. Arvadas was at their head still, facing off with a large spectre, this one with a much clearer appearance. It was tall and thin, elf-like perhaps, but possessing far too much height and not enough girth. The thing had no visible eyes or nose, but a mouthful of terrible fangs and long, thin ears. It hovered before Arvadas, hands in its long, thin robes, with that deathly grin on its horrid face, and the king, for all his daring, plainly had no intention of challenging whatever this thing was. The beast floated there, its strange minions behind it, and suddenly the rampaging voices and pleas ceased, and all was silent in the cavern. The desperate rescuers, and those they had come to help, stood in the dark water watching the thing size them up, before it threw back its fanged head, and laughed so sinisterly they all visibly shuddered. What do you mortals think you're doing in my cavern, refusing my hospitality? Surely your noble selves would not turn down the gifts of my people. It's an insult punishable by death in my realm, and this is my realm, Arvadas Hawking. The king steadied himself. I apologize. I was only attempting to pass through on the way from my city. Another terrible laugh came from the monstrosity. You don't pass through the realm of those in limbo, foolish king. You either pay tribute to the forgotten, or you join the waiting, and we have not had company for a long while. I'm tempted to invite you to entertain us for several more eons. We could keep you in perpetual suffering for some time, I think, before your minds crumbled under the relentless pressure. We are not staying. I'm crossing through your realm because it lies within mine. You'll move, demon, or I'll simply pass you by. A rage overtook the creature, and its face was terrible to behold as the mouth opened, and many more teeth appeared, a number beyond reckoning. It howled and brought the sharp daggers near the face of the king in a shriek of hatred, but Arvadas would not be moved. The creature regarded him with its eyeless gaze, then laughed again. There's no departure without my permission, mortal. You will have to pay a price of some kind to me. I assure I can make it reasonable. The king shook his head. We can simply step around you, Spectre, and be on our way. Can you? The cold of the water intensified, and the gasps of several of the others behind Arvadas told him the frost was painfully sharp. I rule this place, and one of you is already succumbing to my will and wishes to join my thralls. He's already wounded and weak. Give him to me, and I'll grant you the rest of your passage. Arvadas held up his hand to silence the protests of those behind him and answered, His life is not mine to give. Suggest a toll to procure our passing, and I'll consider it. More laughter echoed from the strange spectre. How very noble! Then my price is simple. You, being mortal, will eventually die, and your soul pass to the dead realms or whatever god you desire to join. However, there are ways around such an end. You might join another group of souls, perhaps even one such as my conclave, or maybe another would take your place. Arvadas stood silently for a moment, then spoke. That seems a high price just for letting me pass through your homeland. Then perhaps you'd like to turn back and take that road, assuming you and your companions can muster the will to walk that far. The fiend knew this was no option for the king, and it put him in a position where the only offer he could accept was the one it presented. Arvadas was furious at having placed his companions in such a predicament. He should have studied Cerestus' writings more carefully. As it was, he had remembered this place from casually glancing over the book once in an idle moment. He pondered the situation before him. Selling his soul to this monstrosity would be quite difficult to undo once he agreed to it, but they would never survive the journey back across the water, never mind the dungeon halls, where undoubtedly Vendile was searching for them with the full complement of his guard. Arvadas met the beast's eyes gravely. I accept your offer. A massive grin split the thing's face. Wonderful! Then I shall see you, or a worthy descendant, sometime in the near or far future, for we forgotten can wait a long time for what we desire. I hope the bargain was worth the price to you, Arvadas Hawking. I suppose I'll know soon enough. Then farewell for now, mortal king, until you come here to meet the fate of your ancestors, that they have avoided for centuries, and I dare say only one of us will look forward to it. The spectre melted away from the walls, cackling of his minions echoing off the stone. Varasho grabbed his father's shoulder and spun him in a rage. What have you done? Arvadas regarded him calmly. I did as was necessary for those under my protection. Varasho was exasperated. You gave your life away. Arvadas nodded. And I saved the lives of my friends. It was a sacrifice worth making. Lena intervened then, saying quietly, It was a king's decision, Varasho. Sometime you may have to make the same kind of choice, and the price may be as high. The prince found he could not dispute the obvious wisdom of this statement, so he simply shut his mouth and adjusted Calavar's body on his shoulders. Grimly he strode forward out of the dark pool and began climbing the staircase to the light glowing dimly far above them all. Lena gave Arvadas a look of understanding and even sympathy before she moved to follow Varasho up the stairs. The others passed slowly. Derek clearly relieved to be free of the strange water. Graham appeared saddened but could not find the words to express his emotions, so he simply paused as though prepared to speak, then walked onward with Renan leaning heavily on him. Erindian was the only one who did stop, though he made sure they were both clear of the strange water first. The prudent High Lord regarded his friend calmly. What you've done was not wise, but I also know there were few other choices. We could not have gone back. We could have, it just would have been difficult, and some of us would have died. An unacceptable solution. Erindian frowned at him. To you perhaps, but the selling of one's soul is not something to be done in haste, as you did so. You did not even consult the others or me about your decision. Who's to say we could not have forged past those creatures? Arvadas returned the look. You know we could not have. Erindian gritted his teeth. That does not mean I would not have rather tried. The High Lord swept past him and up the stairs. The usurped king was alone at the foot of the steps in the now rapidly darkening cavern of ancients. Arvadus glanced about him as the coffins and tombs resting in the shallow water, and something caught his eye. An ancient blade lay in its sheath above the liquid, seemingly floating over the pool as though the water was afraid to touch it. Arvadus leaned near, and the sword floated towards him. Despite all of his own warnings, he reached out for it, and the hilt slipped into his palm. The king raised the blade before him. He turned it in his hand, caressing the sheath with his palm. It was gilded in fine silver and depicted a great bolt of lightning crashing down between the pillars of light. It was an Angledaic blade, to be certain. The king took the sword in hand and began to climb the staircase. Before he even reached the third stair, the toothed spectre appeared before him. The beast was grinning again, its triumph apparently imminent. It seems that you did not want to wait out your years, Arvadus. You wish to join my brethren and I sooner, yes? I think not. Indeed, you've taken from my people's trove, and that means you are subject to our law. Your life is forfeit. Arvadus grew angry, and he stepped closer to the foul being, thrusting his face into its own. This blade is of my people, not yours. If you're going to demand so high a price of me, then I think I'll take this in exchange. If you want to claim your prize, come and get it yourself. The monster was baffled by a sudden show of defiance. It reared back, the smile disappearing in a look of indignation. It seemed to recover quickly, but was still unsure of itself. Very well, king, take your blade, and know that I soon will have something of more value for myself. There was a brief moment of evil laughter, somehow less convincing than before, and the creature was gone. Arvadus looked down at the sword, wondering what had possessed him to seize it in the first place, and began the ascent. It took him some time, and when he finally reached the entrance at the top of the stairs, the others were waiting anxiously for him. They could see the first hints of bright sunlight of a new dawn and the gentle late fall breeze, bringing smells of life and from the awakening of the day. Arvadus paused at the exit to take in the feeling of freedom, for he felt he had been imprisoned for years, though in truth it had been mere hours. Upon seeing him at the tunnel entrance, Verasio rushed forward. Father, are you all right? Arvadus waved him away. I'm fine, my son, just fine. Arindian was still brooding over the king's decision in the cavern, but it did not stop him from seeing his strange prize. What's that, Arvadus? A parting gift? Let us just say I negotiated the terms of my contract. That was all that was spoken on the matter, and the party looked around, clearly unsure of what to do next. Calavar was still unconscious, resting on the earth where Verasio had gently set him. The others were battered and weary, but relieved to have escaped the dark underground. Arvadus handed the hard-won sword to Arindian, and then turned his eye to his companions and followers. Well, where have we emerged? Lena answered him. The woodlands, just outside the city walls. Arvadus nodded in satisfaction. Good. Now we need to find a safe place to camp out of sight of Vendile's patrols. Lena pointed to the road just beyond the trees. I recognized this area when we emerged. There's a road just past the woods, and my home lies not far down it. Excellent, then let us retire there for a moment, until I have had some time to come up with a plan to get my kingdom back. Now, if someone would see to covering up the opening to the caves, just in case. Arvadus went silent. The company turned to see that the rock that the cave had seemingly emerged from was now solid, with no sign of seams or cracks denoting a door. Graham shuddered and moved away, but Derek tapped it with his mailed hand a few times to be certain they had not made a mistake. It's solid, completely. But how, Renan said softly, we just came from there. Arvadus waved away the questions. Let us not trouble ourselves over it. We have much work to do. Off we go. The finality of the last statement settled things, and soon the exhausted party was up and moving again, down the road and away from Alderlast. Verasio paused to take one last glance back at the strange stone and could have sworn he saw a foul figure hovering near it, smiling at him. The prince adjusted his armor harder than was necessary and moved stiffly after the others. He tried to put the events of the night behind him. They had, as his father rightly said, much work to do. So that's chapter 22. I will attempt to pick up chapter 23 tomorrow, provided that my schedule allows it, and if not, I'll be back on Wednesday. You can follow me on @LexingChronicle on Twitter, and you can also send messages through Twitch or to trevorhpaul@gmail.com, and you can reach me through YouTube. Again, the channel for YouTube is the same. It's VultureX21, and you can find all of these readings updated there usually a few days after they've gone live on Twitch. Thanks for watching.